Hello everyone, my name is Kitetsu and welcome back to my channel. So this video is my long awaited look at the Wanderers. The Wood Elves are back, ladies and gentlemen, and now they actually feel more like a worthwhile option to collect and play instead of just basically being the dejected leftovers of fantasy's long lost and much loved faction. With the new General's Handbook 2017, Games Workshop has done a great job of putting these rules together to create a faction that just kind of feels right. No longer are the Wanderers inescapably linked to the trees, but we can finally reunite them together as allies. Now, I bought the 6th edition Wood Elves book over 12 years ago now, way back when I couldn't really afford to start collecting another army properly. Nevertheless, I must have spent hours reading that book. I still have it in front of me now. I loved it. The lore was brilliant. The forest, the creatures living inside it and their relationships with each other, like the connection between the trees and the wood elves. Even the mechanics of the armies, they just completely captivated me. And I'm someone who loves all things mythical, which is probably why I love AOS so much. And I also happen to be a massive fan of ranged units and armies, so you know, they can equally, or they could, should I say, seeing as Wood Elves don't really exist anymore, but they could kind of equally handle themselves in close combat. And you know, in terms of range, there were few armies that were better, so you kind of had win-win really. Like, your archers were weak, if anything closed the gap on them, but you had the other units there always ready to like keep everything at bay. So, you know, they were for me always. I really liked them. They were my introduction to Warhammer Fantasy, and I actually still have this beautiful Sisters of Twilight model, like literally the metal version, and it's boxed, and these things are actually worth a fortune now. Last time I saw one on eBay, it was literally, I think, over £100, and even that one's not on there anymore. But for whatever reason, I never really went back to fantasy, and a couple of years back I got myself thinking about, you know, those elves again and what their range might look like now. Needless to say, I was a little bit shocked and saddened to see that they were no more, and that the Age of Sigmar had come along in my absence. Not that I needed to have worried, however, as I now love AOS probably more than I ever loved even fantasy. You know, AOS has brought with it the Sylvaneth, who are a truly excellent army to play and collect. Like, the models are absolutely incredible. I love what they've done with that range. But, you know, now it feels like we're kind of coming full circle in many ways. But anyway, with that little introduction out the way, what I want to do in this video is give an overview of the Wanderers as I see them at the moment. You know, as many of you know by now, I'm a Sylvaneth enthusiast, so lots of my thoughts will kind of be speculative. I haven't really played this army, you know, and as I'm sure most of you know, sometimes things don't translate well from paper to the tabletop, but nevertheless, I think the Wanderers have some, you know, clear winners in their unit list. I'm also going to look at my thoughts on allies, and to be specific on that, should you take Wanderers as allies if you play Sylvaneth? And I guess the converse as well, like, if you want to collect Wanderers, which Sylvaneth, if any, would I add to that list or consider adding to the list? So, you know, in terms of bringing Sylvaneth as allies, that's something that's very easy for me to talk about because I love Sylvaneth. So I know if someone says to me, oh, pick 400 points of Sylvaneth, I can do that, you know. Quick note on allegiance abilities. With the new General's Handbook, of course, the Wanderers have been given a full list of allegiance abilities, command traits, and artifacts, which is insanely cool. I'm, as usual, not going to go through the whole list here, but the updates are excellent, they're exciting, and they look unique to make them kind of stand out as their own awesome faction. As you might expect, you know, range and magic are still strong themes with the Wanderers, but you know, they can retreat and shoot. That's one of their big allegiance abilities. They can, this is their really cool thing, they can basically leave via an edge and then reset up somewhere else along that edge. Obviously they have to stay within 6 inches of the board edge, and they have to keep 9 inches away from the enemy. But with like certain artifacts or command traits, you can change that to any edge. So, you know, keep your archers back, enemy closes in, you just wander straight off the board. Oh, wander. See what I did there? Wander off the board, and then they can literally just pop up on your opponent's deployment edge, like way back out the way. So, you know, that's really cool. And in terms of artifacts, they've got some cool things like adding 10 inches to the general's missile range, which, as you can expect, almost everything has missile capabilities in this army. And there was something, I can't remember what it's called now, but you've got an artifact, or is it an ability, I can't remember, but where you can only attack the general if he's the closest unit, kind of like what they've got going on in 40k at the moment. But there's a whole list of exciting, cool things that they have added to the list. So, good stuff, good stuff. So, onto the leaders quickly of the Wanderers before we get onto the really good stuff, because the leaders are great, don't get me wrong, but they're not where the true, like, meat of this army lies. You've basically got 5 different options, and originally I was going to look at them all in really great detail, kind of like on this slide here with pros and cons and everything. But then I realised we'd be here for literally forever. So I'm going to kind of skim over them a little bit. First we got the Nomad Prince here. He's only 80 points. He's got a fun special rule with his Hawk where he can basically target an opponent, and for the rest of that battle they have to subtract 1 from their hit rolls. It's kind of fun. If you see over here on the cons, I've put it's only really useful against heroes, and it's also not very powerful. Like, you're looking at a 4 to hit, 4 to wound, no rend, 1 damage, so it's not powerful. And with only 1 attack, the odds are not in your favour in terms of hitting and wounding, so you're actually less likely to hit and wound and get that ability off than you are to do it. It is a fun special rule though, nonetheless. I like the fact it's kind of got a storyline behind it. His shield is cool, you know. He can re-roll literally any failed save rolls. That's a very good ability. He's got a fairly good command ability, however, if you look at certain other abilities that aren't even command abilities, I don't think, they're just inherent inbuilt abilities in units in the Stormcast army, they basically have this already, but even better. So that's, although it's a goodish command ability, it's a little bit disappointing in that sense. You know, there's better things out there elsewhere, and for the same amount of points as this guy costs as well. You know, otherwise, I guess the only other thing to say is that I love his model. It's really cool, and it's more up to date than some of the other stuff in the army, which, you know, I love the models and I love the lore, and that can often take priority for me when I'm buying these models and building my lists. But hey, I guess the only other slight thing worth mentioning is that, like all of the Wood Elves, he does have very good movement. So, the Way Watchers. This to me is a more exciting choice at 20 points more than the what was the last guy called, the Nomad Prince. He is really good at range. He's got these 2 kind of quirky options where he can either double his shots with each hit roll of a 6 generating further shots, or he can kind of choose to double his damage with hit rolls of 6 having a -2 rend. So that's really cool. Like, as a supporting range character hiding around the back sniping things, that's really cool. And he's also got this great command ability that I really like, and I think is going to synergize very well with some of the better archer units in the in this army list. And obviously he's hitting on 3s and 3s as you would expect, but you don't want to get him into close combat range, definitely not. But as a ranged option, he's very fun. Whether he's worth his 100 points in cost compared to another unit, hard to say, but personally I like him. On paper, I really like him. So, just kind of picture this. You can stick your Way Watcher in a Wanderer list at the back of the board, next to your best units of archers, and thanks to his command ability, they're now at a -1 to hit. So they're kind of automatically protected from, you know, retaliating range. When the enemy comes close to you, you simply disappear off the board edge with your Allegiance ability. Then you use the Stalker of the Hidden Paths command trait to reappear on the complete opposite side of the board, totally out of harm's way, to basically just continue the fun in the next turn. Sounds great to me, basically. So, yeah, I'd say it's worth his points, and you also have an extra bonus in that if you have a Wanderer's Allegiance army and you take a Way Watcher as your general, you can have Sisters of the Watch as a BATTLELINE unit. And Sisters of the Watch are very cool, so I'm a massive fan of that. These two I am going to skim over pretty quickly. You know, you've got your typical spellcaster. She does have this quirk in which she can auto unbind any one spell per game, so that, depending on who you're up against, could be potentially very useful. And she can also return D3 Wanderers back to life each turn. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you have to pay the points cost for returning models back to a unit that you've essentially already paid the points for after they've kind of been slain. Might be wrong in that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. I don't tend to use armies with much magic, but it's a pretty useful spell. And otherwise she's a fairly standard affair, but you know, nothing bad about her. I think she is 80 points if I remember correctly, and basically the same price as the Nomad Prince. Same price as the Nomad Prince. I was going to say there's definitely another one. Whereas the Wayfinder is the same cost as the Way Watcher. Now, the Wayfinder, personally, I'm not really that fussed with him. He can fire 3 D6 shots once per game, but from my experience with certain Scryer Skaven units, I don't think 3 D6 shots is nearly as useful as you might think. You know, you will end up doing less damage with that than you would want, and it's only a once per game move or ability as well, so you know, nothing too special there. He has a command ability that lets other units use his bravery during battle shock tests, and if those units roll a 1 for their battle shock tests, they make an extra shooting attack, so I guess that's kind of cool, but to be honest, I just doubt I'd really use this guy. He does have something going for him, which is that you can take Wildwood Rangers as battle line, so in that sense, yeah, he is quite good if you intend on using those units a lot. Now obviously that does require him to be your general, and you do need the Wanderer's Allegiance, of course, as you'd expect. I do quite like this idea of the whole having the Allegiance, and then on top of that having to have a specific general to qualify for these BATTLELINE if units, and I still think Dryker and the Spite Revenants should be another example of that, but never mind, I guess they one-up that anyway by making it even easier to field them. But yeah, the way Strider over it, I probably won't really use him either. He is also the same cost as the Nomad Prince. You know, he's not particularly overpriced or anything, he's just not that exciting to me. His ability is, in my opinion, not really worth it at all, and his command ability is essentially the same as the Wayfinder, but instead of the extra shooting, you can do a pile-in, and you can you know, pile in and do an extra attack when you roll that 1 for the battle shock tests. But you know, I'm just not really that fussed with him. You know, he does decent damage, he's got rend, he hits and wounds well, but it's a fairly kind of standard affair, I guess. Now, let's move on to the actual good stuff, the battle line units, and then the rest of the good models in this range. For battle line, we've got 3 options to choose from. We've got the Glade Guard, the Eternal Guard, and the Wildwood Rangers. The latter 2 are battle line if units. I think I've mentioned the Rangers need the, which one was it? The Wayfinder. Whereas the Eternal Guard, you literally just need the Wanderer Allegiance. So, obviously, we have to start with the Eternal Guard. And maybe by now you will have already seen it, but I've already uploaded a separate video comparing them to Dryads and really looking in depth at this unit. So if you want more than what I'm saying here, then go watch that video, and I'll stick the link to that down below as well as my competition. You know, Eternal Guard and Dryads is a pretty big debate at the moment, and as I mentioned in my Sylvaneth analysis, Eternal Guard are actually a very good unit due to their abilities. You know, they don't look that great glancing at their stat line at first, but you know, stick them in cover, pop a Mystic Shield, and they can, and use their ability of course, and they can suddenly be at a 2-up save that re-rolls 1s and 2s, which is crazy. And they're hitting and wounding on 3s, and you know, to make things crazier, you're looking at only 80 points for 10 of these guys. You can basically guarantee I'm going to buy a box of these, and I will test them out in my Sylvaneth lists, but more on that later. As I mentioned in my comparison of Eternal Guard and Dryads, this unit, for all of its excellent strengths, does have some weaknesses. So I would watch that video to find out more, but basically they're weak to mortal wounds, they're weak to rend, as is everything I guess, but they also have to basically get to that objective before they can buff themselves. You know, whilst they're travelling to the objective, they're easy prey, and when they do get to their objective, their movement is basically out the window. So in an optimised list, you would probably shred through these guys quite easily. You know, I've already just said this, but the cost of their amazing abilities is that they can't move, of course, but if you do manage to stick them on an objective, sooner or later, the enemy army is going to have to deal with them. And they do also have this great 2-inch range, so they can attack from the second row back. They've got a massive regiment discount, which is great. Up the top there, I think it's 30 models for 120 points, which is pretty insane. They do, of course, hugely benefit from the allegiance abilities and command trait of the army to try and get them into position quicker. So overall, they're an exciting unit. They're not too shabby, put it that way. Onto the Glade Guard. These guys are pure battle line, so they're not an instant auto include like I'd say the Eternal Guard are at the moment looking at them on paper, but that being said, they're still actually quite a solid ranged option. You know, they only hit on 4s and wound on 4s until you start looking at their abilities. But, or in fact, if they're in a 20 plus unit of models, they get +1 to hit. But oh how I wish we could just get some archers like this in a Chaos army. Why does that not exist? For some reason, GW seem to have completely forgotten at the moment that Chaos have archers. You know, outside of Skaven and Clan Scryer, there's not quite the ranged options I would like to see, shall we say. You know, even if they only hit on the 4s and wound on the 4s, you know, the two coolest thing about the Glade Guard is that they get the +1 to hit in the 20 plus models. Why, oh why, Games Workshop only sells them in a box of 16, I will never know. Even if you buy 2 boxes for the maximum 30, you've still got some extra models in there, so bizarre. But the other cool thing about them is they have this really nice once per battle ability where they can shoot at -3 rend, and you might not do as much damage as you kind of plan with that, with only 50% of your shots even wounding, but then again it depends how many you take. So I do actually really like it a lot, and I think it might end up getting overlooked. Like immediately you look at it and think, oh my god, Glade Guard, -3 rend, that's insanely good, and then you think actually statistically you're probably not going to be hitting that much with it, and it's a once per game use, but I'm still a big fan of it, and I think it definitely has its place. And you know, they're pure battle line, so great for list building options no matter what you're doing. Rangers are pretty great. They hit and wound on 3s, and you know, that's always a great thing. I've told you in many videos by now that I'm a big fan of the 3s and 3s. It's also superb that they have some rend, which is great for this army. They have this really quirky ability where when they're fighting monsters, because they're well practiced, they do D3 damage instead. So again, depending on what you're facing, that could potentially be very good. And looking at their stat line, they also have 2 attacks each, which is very cool. You know, these guys are the guys that like to get in there and cut things up, basically. And obviously all this greatness comes at a cost, which is reflected by their points. Have I got it on? Yeah, it's on the slide there. But honestly, I think the cost is quite reasonable. Like if you said to me to cost a unit with these stats, that's probably similar to something I would come up with myself. So I don't think the cost is too high, and I think they are a situational unit depending on what you're up against. But either way, I think these are actually a very cool option for the Wanderer range for that army. You know, you can't go wrong having more options, even if some of them are more situational than others. I think, to be honest, in just any kind of close combat fight, these guys are going to do fairly well, so I'm a fan. Now, we have 2 different cavalry options for the Wanderers. We've got the Sisters of Thorn and the Wild Riders. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the Wild Riders, as they're fairly standard cavalry, to be honest. They're a bit of a hangover, really, from the Wood Elves, and I don't think thematically they fit very well with the army. Maybe GW will find a good way to explain them, but to be honest, it's the Sisters of Thorn that are more interesting. You know, they appear pretty weak in combat. They cost double the amount of the aforementioned Wild Riders. They do, however, have several things going for them. First thing is that while their attacks aren't great, they do make rather a lot of them, especially when you factor in that they do, of course, ranged attacks whilst in combat still, like all ranged units can. They can cast and unbind a spell each turn, and if you're in a large unit, you can add 1 to those rolls, which is pretty cool. More importantly, however, they have a spell that is unique, and as of right now, I don't quite know what to make of it, because again, like, what looks fantastic on paper, you just don't know until you really played these things. But you know, time will tell how it actually really does play out in the game, but it seems really excellent. Basically, you can pick a unit, and then that unit can re-roll failed saves, and for every 6 they roll, the attacking unit takes a mortal wound. So it seems very good indeed. And on top of that, they obviously have their extreme movement distances and the ranged attacks, which have rend. So, you know, they start looking like a really important consideration for the army. Okay, now on to perhaps my favourite and kind of the last unit in the army really to look at. It's quite a straightforward list to talk about, and these are the Sisters of the Watch. These guys actually need updating a little bit because they're still on the square bases, but these women have some awesome stat lines, and they must surely be like the most elite archer unit in the game. Again, it depends on who your opponent is, but if you're facing chaos, as all good order armies should, then this unit is superb. What you are getting here for the same points cost as a unit of Kurnoth Hunters, so not cheap by any means, is basically a unit of archers that hit and wound on 3s, but if you're targeting chaos, they wound on 2s. That's insane. And even better, if they don't move, they shoot twice. So for a unit of 10, that's 20 shots that are more likely to hit than they are miss, and have an over an 80% chance of wounding chaos targets. If you're unfortunate enough to be charged with them, they also get a bonus shooting attack, like when the charge is successful. So they're pretty cool, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, you can combine this really well with a Way Watcher to protect them with that -1 to hit in the shooting phase. If only they had some rend, like that's their big drawback, but then I guess they'd be fairly broken. They'd just chop through absolutely everything. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Sisters of the Watch. I'm not really sure I haven't really looked at what the general consensus is on these people at the moment. I'm guessing people are going to look at the rend, or should I say lack of rend, as a huge drawback, but I really like them, and I think they're going to work very well should I choose to collect Wanderers, which I'd say is almost a foregone conclusion at the moment. Right, lastly then, I could talk forever about all this stuff, but I do have to hurry myself along. But lastly, I just want to kind of have a look at the ally options that you have with the Wanderers. Again, I'm kind of thinking of linking them up here with Sylvaneth purely because it's probably going to be the most obvious choice. I want to consider the idea of taking a Wanderer army and allying it with Sylvaneth, but I also want to do the exact opposite of that in this video. In terms of bringing Sylvaneth allies to a Wanderer army, my answer is actually a little bit weak, I guess, because I haven't actually built a proper Wanderer list yet. But that being said, knowing Sylvaneth the way I do, I would strongly consider taking some of these options here in a 2,000 points list. So obviously you could take a Spirit of Durthu, which would max out your 400 points of available ally points. You could of course take a Tree Lord Ancient, which would potentially be more competitive. You would then still have that 100 points left over for something else, like a Branch Witch or something. You could take Dryka and a unit of Spite Revenants, and that particular combo has actually just been launched as an ally bundle on the GamesWorkshop website, which is really cool. Thematically also some of my favourite units in the game. Alternatively, you could take this lot. 220 points of Hunters, 80 points of a Branch Witch, and 100 points of Dryads. That's a tidy little ally force there that I reckon would be great fun to field, and you get a lot for your points here, so good way to spend the 400 points. Whether it's worth it or not at the cost of your, you know, synergy with your Wanderer units, that's a debate for another day until I've actually built a Wanderer list and fielded it a few times. But obviously I guess you are losing the synergy of your Sylvaneth units, so these units would not be as good as they would be in just a normal Sylvaneth army. It'd be cool if you could somehow add allegiance abilities to an ally list, but I guess that's very complex to balance maybe. So for 1,000 points list, you're considerably more limited in terms of taking Sylvaneth as allies. You can only really choose from the 80 to 100 points units shown here, as you only really have the 200 points to play with in the first place. I don't quite know Wanderers enough to make this call yet, to be perfectly honest. In all honesty, the way I'm thinking at the moment, I probably wouldn't actually bother in a 1,000 point list of Wanderers taking any Sylvaneth. You know, without the synergy of the Sylvaneth Allegiance to call on, I'd probably rather just spend the extra points on the Wanderers, to be honest. So, anyway, on the flip side, we obviously have a Sylvaneth army bringing Wanderers, and this is far more easy for me to do because you know, I've already got my 1000-point list of Sylvaneth made up, and there's plenty of Wanderer units that I love and want to experiment with. These units here just on this slide are ones that I'm particularly keen to field and very interested in. I probably should put the Glade Guard on there as well because they're pretty cool, but here's my current 1000 point Sylvaneth list that I've built for the new handbook, and my first option really would be to experiment cutting out a unit of Dryads and switching them for Eternal Guard. So nothing too complex, and not necessarily swap out the Dryads because the Eternal Guard are better, but more because I want to just kind of experiment really with the list and see how this affects the dynamics, and you know, basically just field test the unit a lot. And I guess it's all about having a variety of tactics that you can take with the same army list. So that's always cool. Incidentally, if you have watched my Sylvaneth tactics video, you do regain the extra, I think it's 20 points here that I lost, and that does let you refield the Tree Lord Ancient. I think previously the points increase of the Kurnoth Hunters prevented you taking more or less this exact list. So if you really want the Tree Lord Ancient and you're prepared to swap the Dryads out for the Eternal Guard, that's one really cool option that you can do there. Here was one idea I've played with. You know, how about I switch a unit of Hunters with a Way Watcher? I'd need to very carefully consider what the remaining Hunters would be armed with, but it would leave me with 140 extra points of Sylvaneth to take, so, you know, it's not all bad. You can field a larger unit of Dryads after doing this, so, you know, you start taking advantage of their better rules, which is also kind of cool to be doing in a 1000-point list. It's not something I'd be used to doing. Alternatively, I guess you could consider either taking a unit of Glade Guard for fun. You know, you add that extra bit of range to your list and max out your 200 ally points, or you could even have a second unit of Eternal Guard, and then you'd still have a potential 140 points of extra Sylvaneth to use. So, you know, you can make those 1000 points spread a long way in this list, but to be honest, that's really all I wanted to say for this video. I hope it hasn't gone on for too long. Seems about right for you know, first thoughts, overview, a little touch on the tactics, the points costs of everything. But you know, there's lots of exciting possibilities here really for Wanderers and Sylvaneth. I just kind of hope that Games Workshop can sort out the lore for the Wanderers, because at the moment they do actually feel like they're having a bit of an identity crisis. Like, are they the Wood Elves of old? Not really. They're wandering? Where are they wandering? And why do they still have these Wild Riders? And I don't know. They don't quite fit with this. They don't really fit with this Sylvaneth lore either. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. As always, I've done the more in-depth comparison of the Eternal Guard versus Dryads. So, you know, mentioned that earlier, but the link will be down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm still literally being blown away by all of your support. Keep that up, drop a like, and if you're new, give me a sub, because it's so encouraging and I absolutely love it. Until next time, my friends, stay awesome, and I will see you soon.